The way that prison healthcare relates to the Constitution is through the 8th Amendment, and the 8th Amendment states excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines be imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment. And we believe that prisoners not getting the right healthcare is cruel and unusual punishment because they're not getting their needs assessed.
So instead of prisoners getting treated when they have, let's say, chickenpox or measles, the prison instead to just quarantine them altogether until the disease goes away. That's bad because they're not getting treated properly, which can cause other diseases to get them sick and possibly die.
Another factor of bad healthcare in prisons is overcrowding because they can't treat the whole population fully or adequately, so that just makes everything bad.
International standards require that prisoners with conditions such as cancer and mental health issues, they are required to get transported to hospitals where they can get specialized treatments for their conditions.
Prisoners with pre-existing infectious diseases like HIV, AIDS, strep throat, and others may not get treated correctly or don't get treated at all, so it makes the whole prison infected with diseases. The Supreme Court case of Estelle versus Gamble was in 1976. This Supreme Court case established the standard of what a prisoner must plead in order to claim a violation of the 8th Amendment. Gamble had said that the doctors in the prison had failed to provide appropriate care. The court held that medical malpractice did not rise to cruel and unusual punishment simply because the victim is a prisoner.
Deaths at private prisons. What prompted your interest in this originally?
Well, several years ago now, I got a call from a woman, as I do often, reporting that her brother had suffered pretty significant neglect inside of a federal prison in Mississippi, a place called the Adams County Correctional Center. And when I began looking into this prison, it turned out that it was this privately run federal prison run by the Corrections Corporation of America, and that her brother had actually died after being held in that facility. And I began to dig into the details of her claims and other dynamics that I had started to observe in these facilities, including a number of repeated riots that were breaking out in these for-profit federal prisons used to hold non-citizens. Riots are pretty rare in federal prisons, especially low-security federal prisons, but in these facilities, they've continued to break out. And I wanted to know why. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request, and then because I didn't get anything back from the Bureau of Prisons, actually ended up suing the Bureau of Prisons, which led to the release of 30,000 pages of documents. The first story I worked on earlier this year, I reported on dozens of deaths of prisoners held inside of this group of a dozen federal private prisons, deaths that were a result of, that followed deeply and disturbingly negligent medical care. People who were complaining for weeks and months, sometimes more than a year, of significant illness and pain, and receiving nearly no substantive care at all. In fact, often never seeing a doctor, being relegated to low-level medical workers who didn't have the training to really provide the care that these people needed. And many of these folks ended up dying as a result. I asked a team of doctors to review 9,000 pages of medical files that I obtained through this open records request, medical files of 103 men who died in these prisons. And those doctors, their reviews of these files, the doctors agreed that in a third of the cases that they could review, negligent or substandard medical care very likely contributed to.
As you can see, inmates that have persistent medical problems in state prisons is a very large number compared to the other categories. The percent of inmates that have not continued on medication during incarceration is an outrageous 28.9%. Even though a lot of the inmates that come in on prescription drugs, 24.3% of the incarcerated don't continue on the same medications throughout.
Is there always a doctor like on site, or is there
Yes.
certain hours that there's not?
There's always a doctor on site, but getting that doctor to do anything is pretty much impossible.
So, say
I
that
love dogs. They're one of my favorite animals.
like somebody's like really sick with like cancer, is that like a big issue that like they help with, or do they still
They
like,
really don't give a rat's ass. They really don't care
so
if
they're
you
like
have cancer or not. They just tell you to go about your business, do your thing, and if it gets any worse, let them know, and they'll see what they can do about making you comfortable.
So my teacher is on the board of correction, and she said that when she went, this was like a week ago, she went to the jail or the prison out there on Gowan, and she saw like this room, and it was just filled with sick old men. Is like does the doctor
That's the
go in
medical
there?
unit on the yard. I know exactly what she's talking about, and it's filled with just sick people, and they just segregate them.
Did,
They keep them segregated from population, give them medication, and stuff like that. That's all they do.
so
with
does
those
a
guys.
doctor like come in and check up on them, or do they
No.
just leave them in there?
They leave them in there with a guard, and if they have any issues, then they'll have them either go to medical or the doctor might come down. That just depends on if the doctor wants to walk that far.
Wow.